Making trades is the number one way to solidify a fantasy football championship run for your team because player values are changing every single day, and that means there are places we can exploit these values. But if you do it the wrong way, you can very quickly get yourself out of the playoff push and never have a chance. In the next 10 minutes, I guarantee you I will give you a better chance to make your fantasy playoffs with buy lows, buy highs, and everything else at the end. So make sure to hit that like button as you're coming in here. It helps me a ton. It's completely free to you, and we will start with our first offer by sending with Ricky Pearsall. Understand this is the lowest value he will ever be at, and I'll give you some exact trade packages you can send to get him on your roster at the end, but reports just came out that his timeline for return is fuzzy. That's not necessarily good news, but he has been dealing with his knee injury since week 4. Managers are likely frustrated with him not playing and him not having any value on their bench. But if you isolate his healthy game so far this year, he is top 15 in yards per game. He's top 15 in targets, averaging 14.6 fantasy football points in that stretch. Now, yes, it was a very small sample size. We can't take that and run with it, but he's shown flashes last year as well. And now he has even less wide receiver competition than he did in 2024. Perfect for a playoff push, just like the 49ers in real life are doing that. So there's incentives for him to come back, a good offense for him to come back to, and seriously, one of the guys in your league are probably just done with him, and you can get him for absolute cookies. You can get him for guys like J.K. Dobbins, Keenan Allen, even Kayshon Boutte 1-for-1, or Mark Andrews in some leagues. Those are some guys I'd like to send. And again, make sure to comment your trade packages or what kind of trades you want to make. I will be in there helping you. I love seeing you guys in the comments. And you also need to send some trade offers for Rome Odunze. Everybody is pissed off on this man right now, and I understand. After you drop 0 fantasy points on a week where you play the number one best defense in allowing fantasy points to wide receivers at 33 per game, the most yards to opposing offenses at over 425, and the Bears dropped 50 points, all of that. I mean, I could keep going on how positive this matchup, but the story is not there. With not one single reception in a game environment like this, everybody's pissed off. So I absolutely understand this. It's horrible, but on top of that, he's been averaging 7.1 fantasy points per game since their bye in week 5, so his value is at an all-time low, and everybody sees that. The good news is that he's still consistently running the most routes on this team out of every single wide receiver for the Bears. The opportunity is still there. Even after that goose egg last week, he's still top 25 in targets, target share, air yards, and one of the most efficient wide receivers, I guess still top 25 there technically. And he has some very pass-first matchups coming for the rest of the season, a positive fantasy football playoff schedule. I'd like to trade guys like David Montgomery, especially after what he's about to do to the Commanders defense. Stephon Diggs, DK Metcalf, all 1-for-1. And again, make sure to comment your trade packages. I will help you guys out there. And also, send your trade offers for Quinshon Judkins. Your fantasy app, go right to it and make this for you. I will help you guys figure it out. Judkins, from a broader perspective, has not looked good, you could say, over the last few weeks. I mean, outside of week 7, where he absolutely destroyed and curb stomped and embarrassed the Dolphins, putting up 26 fantasy points on them, which every running back does. They're top 3 in fantasy points allowed to the position. He averaged 4 fantasy football points per game in the last few games, 37% of the snaps, like without a ton of receiving usage as well. So to the common fantasy manager, it just looks like he's terrible and he is just completely falling off. That is nowhere near the truth. The reality is he was dealing with an injury, possibly going to keep him out this week, if not, depending on when you see this video. Either way, he has one of the toughest, or has had one of the toughest running back schedules so far this year in fantasy points allowed to the position. No running back in the league from week 3 on to now has had a harder schedule than Quinshon Judkins has. This completely flips. He has a top 3 rest of season schedule in fantasy points allowed to the position. It's insanely important, especially for a running back on a Browns team that isn't going to be blowing teams out every week and can't necessarily stick to the run in negative matchups. They'll be able to lean on the run in these ones for the rest of the year, again, given the schedule. Judkins is leading all Browns running backs in routes run per game, so he's going to have that floor as a receiving guy, touches per game, red zone usage, everything, and that's going to continue to happen. You can get him on your roster for trading guys like Travis Etienne, especially DeAndre Swift if you can do it, Jalen Waddle. These levels of guys are what I'm looking for to get him on my roster. And nobody ever tells you buy high on players because the culture is to buy low, but we are 100% buying high on Rico Dowdle, who is a top 15 running back very easily rest of season. I don't care that he's been putting up 30 fantasy points a game. If you isolate his games, as a starting running back, he's averaging over 25 points per game. That is absolutely insane. He's getting used in the receiving game a bit. That keeps his floor even safer than what it already is. But what's bigger than all of that is that the Panthers are going full Rico Dowdle mode. That has been the biggest issue. They paid Chuba Hubbard all this money. As an NFL, as a business, as a team, you're going to give the guy that you paid the most money to the most snaps because you just want to look good as an owner. they're going away from that. You look at last week and the splits that we've been seeing between the two, it was extremely drastic. We saw Rico Dowdle lead in pretty much everything. Finally, this is what we've wanted. He's been clearly the most efficient running back. 25 carries to Chuba Hubbard's 5, 5.2 yards per carry to Chuba's 3.4, dominated in every single role, red zone, third downs, everything. And even from a season-long perspective, he has clearly been the more efficient running back, pretty much saving this team this season. This will continue to be a 70-30 split between the two backs. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if it gets up to more like an 80-20, on top of him having one of the most positive fantasy football schedules for the rest of the year and an amazing fantasy football playoff schedule too. He will literally win leagues. Like, this is what we play and use the waivers for. So you can get him on your team for a guy like T. Higgins. You can trade away Zay Flowers, Devonta Smith, George Pickens. I see him as a top 10 running back rest of season, just like Bucky Irving, who is another guy that has not played in a very long time, not a healthy game since week 4. Fantasy managers are likely in a win now mode if they drafted Bucky Irving. He's probably going to return this week, if not next. Again, by the time I record this video and when you watch it, it may be different. But we do need to talk about how he's been efficient and how good he has been when he's on the field. He's averaging over 18 fantasy football points per game. He's top 10 in volume. We don't really need to go too deep into that because we know he's great. But more importantly than all of that, like a lot of guys in this list, if you guys can sense the theme, he has one of the best fantasy football rest of season schedules. This is about the time of year, guys, where you need to be worrying about that, especially if you have a winning record. And the fantasy football playoffs is also positive for him, getting the Falcons, Panthers, and the Dolphins in the championship. We just talked about Quinshon Judkins and how popular and how good this Dolphins defense is to running backs. They're allowing some of the most points. This is going to be a league-winning guy if you can trade for him. He's also top 7 in receiving usage and efficiency on the ground as well on a per-game basis. The offense is very efficient. Baker Mayfield is keeping this offense rolling, and a ton of yards are coming from it. Everything you want is here for Bucky Irving. You can get him for guys like Javonte Williams, Derrick Henry, Breece Hall. I would do all of those one for one for this guy, Bucky Irving. But if you're seriously wanting an edge at the tight end position, let's say you don't have Brock Bowers or Trey McBride, one of the top 2 guys, you need to keep your eye on Tyler Warren for the coming weeks. He's been coming off some really bad games, so let me dive deeper into this before you guys keep scrolling on. 9.3 fantasy points against the Titans in week 8, 7.6 against the Steelers the week after that. And he does have some pretty atrocious matchups coming here against the Falcons, who are allowing the number 1 least amount of fantasy points to opposing tight ends this year. Then they have a bye week. Then they get the Chiefs. Then they get the Houston Texans. All bottom 5 in fantasy points allowed to tight ends. Very, very negative. So he very well could be in a very rough patch in the next few weeks, making his fantasy value insanely low. But after that terrible stretch, from week 14 on, he has one of the most positive fantasy schedules for all of tight ends in the league, and this is extremely good. They just traded away A.D. Mitchell, opening up a bit more opportunities for him. They're 9th in passing attempts as a team, 4th in yards, 1st in red zone efficiency and conversion rate. This is exactly what you want for a tight end that is a rookie, mind you, getting some of the top targets in the NFL. He's still top 7 in target share, yards per route run, fantasy points per game, almost every single tight end stat and efficiency stat, despite having one of the hardest schedules that he's already played. Like, he had one of the toughest starts of the year, and he was still able to do all of this. So imagine when it gets easier. He is a top 5 tight end you need to be going through and getting. Some players I also think you should go through and trade for are Drake May. The rushing upside is keeping him absolutely amazing. He's another version of a buy high because he hasn't really had a bad game, but the name value tied to him in some looser leagues might not value him as high as he should be. Saquon Barkley as well, coming into this week with a groin injury, coming out of the bye. I'm not worried about it. Give him some time to be healthy. He has one of the best fantasy playoff schedules for running backs, probably the best in the fantasy playoffs as well. And we know through last year as well, he absolutely dominates in the positive matchups. Like, he's decent in the tough ones, but positive matchups specifically, with the way Eagles run the offense, he is amazing. Go get him and Garrett Wilson. They completely cleared house with everything in this offense. The Jets just are going full tank mode. Garrett Wilson is a beneficiary of that technically because he is still the wide receiver 1 and is going to get the most targets. You can also get Trey Benson only if, and I say only if, you have a very winning record and you are pretty much a lock to make the fantasy football playoffs. He is still going to take some time to come back, but he has the best fantasy football playoff schedule. That stretch of games, especially in week 17, is going to be very positive for you. So consider doing that as well as trading for Marion Hampton. His timeline is still pretty much up in the air, but will be coming back soon. Another guy, if you can sense a trend, getting these top guys coming off their injury, exactly like what we did with Rashee Rice. He wasn't injured, but he was coming off a suspension. We trade him very low. Now he's a top 1 wide receiver, so we can get him on our roster for cheap. Do the same thing with these guys that are injured, but a rapid fire list of players we need to sell off of our list. If you don't have them, don't get them now. And if you have them, sell them as soon as you can, starting with Kyron Williams. He's getting a good amount of usage, but he is reliant on the opportunities. If Blake Corum starts getting more usage, if Jarquez Hunter starts getting more usage, which we've kind of seen a little bit so far this year, he's going to decrease in value. And again, in the negative matchups, they're going to use more pass-heavy schemes, and he doesn't necessarily catch a lot of passes. I could see him regressing in value from especially what he was last week with a ton of carries and usage. We also can sell high on Mark Andrews. This is a top one for me. Isaiah Likely has been in our stash videos for the longest time, and he continues to be that because he is running more routes than Mark Andrews on a per-game basis. Mark Andrews is great in receiving touchdowns. He's never going to be a volume guy, especially with Isaiah Likely running more routes than him. I don't want to rely on the touchdowns, especially coming off a game of over 15 fantasy points and 2 touchdowns last week. We know Lamar Jackson targets his tight ends in the end zone a lot, but I don't want to have to trust that on a week-to-week basis. You could also sell Jake Ferguson, who has been decreasing a ton in value ever since CeeDee Lamb has come back from his injury. He is a very low average depth of target guy, not a ton of upside if there's not a ton of targets going his way, and we've seen without CeeDee Lamb, that is pretty much the case. So if he's not scoring touchdowns and getting volume, he's going to be a little bit more worrisome. He's been a top 3 tight end all year. Now is the time to cash in on that and get some other guys. But that is going to finish out this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one coming tomorrow. All glory to the man above.